The longship groaned as it kissed the shore, its hull scarred by storms and silence. Einar stepped onto the black sand of Kattegat, his boots sinking like memories into the damp earth. The wind carried no welcome, only the salt sting of unease. Smoke rose from the longhouses, but it was thin, hesitant, as if the hearths themselves feared to burn too brightly. Faces turned toward him from the shadows of doorways, eyes hollowed by something unnamed. The great hall, banners hung limp, their colours dulled, and the usual clamour of the docks had been swallowed by a watchful quiet. Even the gulls seemed muted, circling high as though wary of what festered below. He had left a kingdom of roaring feasts and clanging steel. He returned to a husk draped in whispers. Someone had begun weaving fate without him, and the threads were already slick with blood. Einar's hand drifted to the hilt of his seax, not in threat, but in reflex. Years of war had taught him that silence was the loudest warning. The villagers did not step forward, they did not retreat, they simply watched, their faces carved from the same studs as the burial mounds crowning the hill. A child, half hidden behind a splintered doorpost, clutched a wooden raven so tightly its wings had splintered in her grip. An old woman turned away, muttering into her shawl. Her words lost, but her dread unmistakable. No one met his eyes long enough to offer even the ghost of recognition. He was a shadow walking through a dream that had already ended. The silence wasn't just absence of sound. It was a wall built brick by brick from secrets too heavy to speak. And behind it something waited. Not a man, not a beast, but the slow, coiling weight of prophecy unfolding in the dark. A raven landed on the ship's prow with a thud that echoed like a drumbeat in the stillness. Its obsidian eyes locked onto Einar, unblinking, as if measuring the weight of his soul against some ancient scale. The villagers stirred, not with fear, but with grim recognition. Whispers slithered through the crowd like serpents in dry grass. Odin, I has found you. The All-Father sends his warning. A fisherman crossed himself with a trembling hand. A shield maiden turned her face to the wind, as though praying it would carry the omen away. The bird did not croak. It did not shift, it simply watched. A black sentinel perched on the spine of a vessel that had sailed beyond the edge of fate. Einar knew the signs. Ravens did not come for the innocent. They came for the marked. And in that moment, with the breath of the North Sea cold on his neck, he understood. The prophecy had not waited for his return. It had named him long ago. Einar moved toward the hall, each step heavier than the last, the raven's gaze burning into his back like a brand. He spotted Bjorn first, his shield brother, once quick with a laugh and quicker with an axe, leaning against the mead house post, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the horizon as if Einar were no more than mist. When their paths nearly crossed, Bjorn turned his shoulder just enough to avoid acknowledgement, his jaw tight beneath a beard streaked with ash. Further on, Astrid, who had once braided his hair before battle and kissed his scars after, stood by the well with her back turned, her knuckles white around the rope. Even young Hrolf, who followed him like a pup, now lingered at the edge of the square, clutching a rusted spear too large for his frame, his gaze darting away the moment Einar has met his. Their silence was an indifference. It was exile, not by decree, but by dread. They knew something he didn't at the tea, or worse. They knew something about him, and in that web of averted eyes and stiffened spines, Einar felt the truth coil tighter. The betrayal hadn't come from enemies. It had risen from the hearts of those who once called him brother. The great hall door stood ajar, their iron hinges weeping rust. Inside, the hearth was cold, ashes scattered like forgotten vows. On the high seat, empty, lay a single gauntlet, its leather split, still flecked with dried mud from the western marshes. An elder, Gunnar the law speaker, emerged from the shadows, his voice a rasp of frayed rope. "The jarl vanished 3 nights past," he said, eyes fixed on the floor as though the truth might scorch his tongue. "No raiders, no storm." He walked into the mist beyond the standing stones and did not return. A map lay half-burned on the table, its edges charred. The route to the sacred grove blackened as if struck by lightning. Someone had tried to erase his path, or his purpose. Einar's blood turned to ice. The jarl had been the anchor of Kattegat. Without him, the land drifted toward chaos. And now, with prophecy circling like a starved wolf, Einar realized his return wasn't coincidence. It was summons. In the smoky gloom of the mead hall, a far corner, Torvald the Red nursed a horn of sour ale, his voice low but sharp as a whetstone. "He steps ashore, and the jarl vanishes," he murmured, just loud enough for the nearest ears to catch. "The ravens come, the hearths die." Coincidence? A log cracked in the half-dead fire, and heads turned, not toward the flame, but toward Einar, the shadow stretching long across the floor. Torvald, its words spread like frost on still water. He carries the curse of the drowned lands. The gods turned their faces when he sailed west, and now he drags their wrath home. Whispers hardened into glances, glances into blame. A fisherman spat into the rushes. A mother pulled her child closer, as if Einar's very breath might blight the air. No one shouted. No one accused outright. But in the tightening of belts, the shifting of weight away from him, the way even the torchlight seemed to shrink from his path, Einar felt the verdict settle like snow on a grave. He had not brought misfortune. They had decided he was it. A summons came not with the shout, but with a bone whistle, shrill cry from the cliffs. 3 notes, thin as spider silk, cutting through the fog. The villagers parted without word as the seeress, thrall, eyes clouded white as sea foam, pressed a rune-carved stone into Einar's palm. It burned cold. "She waits where the veil is thin," the boy whispered, then vanished into the smoke like a snuffed wick. Beyond the burial mounds, in the crook of the elderwood grove, where no axe had dared bite for 100 winters, the seeress stood robed in crow feathers and ash. Her breath misted with each syllable of a tongue older than runes. The threads "Frey," she said, not turning. "The Norns weave with blood now, and your name is knotted deep in the tear." Behind her, the earth bore fresh scars, 9 crows nailed to the roots, their beaks open in silent prophecy. Fate hadn't just shifted. It had snapped, and Einar stood in the break. The seeress turned at last, her eyes 2 pools of frozen tar, and beckoned him into the reeking dark of her hut. The air inside clung thick with the stench of burnt yew and old blood. On a slab of whalebone, 9 candles guttered in a circle, their flames bent as if bowing to something unseen. She seized his wrist, her fingers brittle as winter twigs, and pressed the rune stone into the flame. It did not burn. It wept black smoke. "Flames will crown the unworthy," she hissed, voice splitting like dry ice. "And the chosen will walk alone." The words coiled in his chest like a blade. Outside the wind died. Even the crows ceased their silent vigil. In that breathless hush, Einar knew. The crown she spoke of was not forged in gold, but in fire, and it was already waiting for him. Einar left the seeress' hut with the taste of prophecy like iron on his tongue, the cold runestone still clenched in his fist. The path back to his longhouse wound through skeletal birches, their branches clawing at a sky bruised purple with dusk. He found his door not as he left it, ajar, waiting, but sealed with a wreath of rowan twigs bound in black wool. The wood beneath scored deep with runes. Utlagar, outlaw. Beneath it, the inverted spear of accusation, its point driven into the threshold like a nail in a coffin. His own name, carved in the elder foothark, was crossed through with a jagged line. The mark of the oath breaker. The wind hissed through the grove, but the symbols did not tremble. They stood as judgment, not warning. His home, once a sanctuary of oiled shields and sleeping hounds, had become a shrine to his exile, sanctified not by gods, but by the fear of men who needed a scapegoat more than a hero. Torvald stood in the center of the square, arms wide as if to embrace the gathering storm, his crimson cloak stark against the ashen sky. He did not flinch as Einar approached, only smiled, slow and slick as oil on water. "You wear your guilt like a second skin," he called, voice ringing off the longhouse beams. The crowd held its breath, a ring of silent wolves circling 2 stags. Einar stopped a spear a length away, the rune stone cold in his palm. "You've stitched lies into every mouth here," he said, voice low enough that only Torvald and the wind could hear. Torvald's grin tightened. "Truth is what the land bleeds when you walk upon it." A hand twitched toward a knife. Another shifted a shield. The air hummed, taut as a bowstring. But no blade fell. Not yet. For now, the only blood spilled was in the silence between words, and in that silence, Einar saw it. Torvald's fear, buried deep beneath the bravado. The man hadn't just spread rumors. He had tried to bury a truth too dangerous to name. Torvald's hand snapped up, not to his knife, but to the hilt of the ancestral blade at his hip, the one sworn on his father, Spire. "If you deny the whispers," he declared, voice cracking like ice underfoot, "then let the gods decide your worth." He drew the sword just enough for the firelight whisk to catch its edge, a sliver of cold truth in the gloom. "I call you to holmgang, Einar, here, now, on hallowed ground, before the stones and the sky." A murmur rippled through the crowd, not of shock, but of grim relief. The unspoken had found its ritual. The duel would cleanse the air or drown them all in blood. Einar met his rival's gaze, seeing not arrogance now, but desperation. A man who feared what Einar might uncover more than death itself. The challenge hung like a noose, woven not of rope, but of law and lightning. To refuse was to confess. To accept was to step onto the altar of fate, where only one truth would survive the blade. Steel sang as whetstones bit into iron, the rasp echoing like a death rattle through the hollow square. Torvald knelt in the mud, grinding his father, blade with methodical fury, each stroke flinging sparks that died before they touched the earth. Einar said nothing. He drew his own sayax, its edge nicked from Western wars, and began to hone it in silence. Long, slow pulls that made the crowd lean back as if the sound itself could cut. Elders marked the holmgang circle with ash and salt, their fingers tracing runes of binding and blood price into the trampled soil. Drums began then, deep-throated and slow, thudding from the cliffs like the heartbeat of the fjord itself. Warriors chanted in low, guttural tones, voices weaving through the mist. Ein hug, ein leak, ein Sieger, ein Daudi. One strike, one corpse, one victory, one death. The air thickened with sweat, iron and the old magic that watched from the standing stones, waiting, always waiting for the first drop of blood to fall. Steel met steel with a shriek that split the mist. No flourish, only fury. Torvald lunged, blade arcing low to cripple, but Einar twisted aside, the edge slicing air where his thigh had been. Mud sucked at their boots as they circled, breath ragged, eyes locked, not in hatred but in the terrible intimacy of men who once shared bread and blood. Torvald struck again, faster this time, a viper's thrust meant for the throat. Einar parried, the shock jarring up his arm, and countered with a brutal sweep that bit into Torvald's shoulder guard, splintering wood and drawing first blood. It welled dark against crimson wool, a sacrifice the earth drank greedily. The crowd's chant faltered. This was no ritual. This was reckoning. And in the wet gasp between blows, Einar saw it. Torvald wasn't fighting to win. He was fighting to silence. Einar's blade hovered at Torvald's throat, the tip drawing a bead of blood that gleamed like a fallen star. The crowd's breath hung frozen, justice a hair's breadth from vengeance. Then the earth bucked beneath them, a deep groan tearing from the bones of the fjord. Stones toppled from the holmgang circle as if shoved by unseen hands. From the cliffs above, the war horn of Kattegat split the sky. 3 blasts raw and ragged, the ancient call for invasion or omen. Not raiders, not storm, something older. The horn's cry died into a silence heavier than before, and in that void every eye turned seaward, where the mist uncoiled like a waking serpent. The duel was forgotten. The true reckoning had just begun. From the ridge, the scouts came stumbling down like men, fleeing ghosts. Their faces stripped of colour, breath torn raw in their throats. "Ships!" one rasped, collapsing to his knees in the mud. "Not Norse. Not any we know." The others nodded, hollow-eyed, fingers clutching amulets or the hilts of trembling blades. Through the thinning mist, the dark shapes emerged. Low, lean hulls carved with serpentine beasts unknown to northern seas, sails dyed the colour of dried blood. No dragon prow, no raven standard, only silence and the slow, deliberate crawl of oars like the legs of a spider across water. The markings on their hulls were not runes, but sigils, spirals that coiled inward, eyes that stared even when unseen. Kattegat had faced raiders, storms, famine, but never this. Never something that sailed not for plunder, but for prophecy. The seeress appeared at the cliff's edge as if summoned by the dread itself. Her crow-feather cloak snapping like black wings against the gale. She did not shout. Her voice cut through the wind, as though the air obeyed her. The sea brings not just warriors, but doom, she intoned, eyes fixed on the blood-sailed ships. This is the hour the Norns whispered of when they wove your thread with ash. Her words sank into the silence like stones into deep water. The villagers recoiled, not from her, but from the truth in her voice. The invaders were no accident. They were answer, punishment, fulfillment, and Einar, standing with blood on his blade and exile on his name, felt the weight of every unspoken oath pressed down upon him. The prophecy had not come for Kattegat. It had come for him. Torvald spat blood into the mud, then rose, not with pride, but with the grim resolve of a man who glimpsed the abyss beyond personal feud. He met Einar's eyes across the broken holmgang circle, no longer as rival, but as mirror. The blood-sailed ships loomed closer, their silence more terrible than war cries. Without word, Torvald thrust his blade point first into the earth between them, a truce sealed not in honour, but in survival. The crowd parted as Einar stepped forward, ash-streaked and oathless, yet the only anchor left in a world unmoored. Together they turned toward the sea, 2 fractured halves of a dying order, bearing the weight of Kattegat. Last hope on shoulders still slick with each other's blood. Forges roared to life in the dead of night, hammers biting into iron with desperate rhythm as every able hand reforged plowshares into swords. Signal fires bloomed along the ridgelines, amber eyes blinking awake across the darkened fjord, each flame a prayer written in smoke and ember. Mothers dragged chests before doorways, stuffing wool into cracks, hiding children beneath floorboards, with stern lips pressed to their brows in wordless farewell. Ravens wheeled above the longhouses in widening spirals, their wings stitching the sky with omens, their silence more deafening than any cry. Torches guttered in the salt-laced wind, casting long, trembling shadows that clung to warriors lacing mail over hearts already braced for doom. The air thrummed, not with battle lust, but with the terrible clarity of a people who knew this was no raid, but reckoning. And as the first drums began their dirge-like pulse, the whole of Kattegat stood breathless, steel in hand, waiting for the sea to speak its final verdict. Through the shredding veil of fog, the enemy ships emerged, not low raiders, but leviathans of blackened oak, their hulls sheathed in iron scales, prows carved into gaping maws of beasts with eyes of polished jet. Towering above Kattegat, skiffs. They moved without oar or sail, propelled by a silence that drowned the sea itself. Then came the drums, deep, shuddering booms that rolled from their decks like the heartbeat of a buried god, each pulse shaking loose pebbles from the cliffs and freezing blood in mortal veins. Warriors gripped their axes until knuckles blanched, breath held against the dread that coiled in the salt, heavy air. This was no fleet of men. It was the sea-made war, and it had come to collect a debt written in prophecy and paid in bone. The drums fell silent, not faded, cut, as though the sea itself had clenched its jaw. From the lead ship, a figure rose atop the iron-scaled prow, silhouetted against the dying moon. No helm, no war paint, only a face, carved by time and salt, framed by hair the colour of storm-washed bone. Einar's breath seized. The wind tore at his cloak, whipping it like a banner of ash, but he did not blink. He knew that face, knew the scar that split the left brow, a wound he'd stitched himself years ago on a beach far to the west, under a different sky, a different name. The man who had vanished in the mist was not lost. He had returned, not as jarl, not as brother, but as herald of the abyss. Einar's axe trembled in his grip, not from fear, but from the terrible unravelling of every truth he'd ever bled for.